ultimate law of life, or in Japanese, shoji ichi daiji kechi myakusho. I always like saying that. So, just as we usually do, to help you to remember and refresh your minds in what's come so far in this Gosho. You remember that in the first half of this Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin explained what the ultimate law of life is, which we who chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo transmit, we both receive it and transmit it to those who follow us. If we fail to do this, of course, the understanding of the law of life disappears once again into the darkness where it lay, existing always eternally but unknown until the Buddha revealed it. So this understanding of life is first of all what the pattern of life is. Very briefly, you remember, we described it as rather like the weaving of a cloth. So during the weaving process you have a warp and a weft, and I still don't know which goes which way, but one goes this way and the other goes that way. Anyway, you could say that the warp of this cloth we call life is the two phases of life and death, which are constantly recurring over and over and over again, not just in ourselves, but in every other form of life. Life and death. Or, as we now understand it, you could call it living and latent. Or, if you like, seen and unseen. So we discovered that even emotions, such as anger, are going through these same stages of constant life or death. Anger rises up in us from nowhere, it seems. It manifests itself in the red cheeks and blazing eyes, and then when something changes in the environment, anger disappears. It doesn't go away, because at any time it can rise up again. This is anger going through its seen and unseen states, or if you like, anger living and anger dead. And the same with every other aspect of life, including, of course, trees and plants and flowers and stars and planets and our own lives. So there is this going on, this constant movement between life and death, seen and unseen. And we discovered that just like sleep is essential to refresh our bodies for the next day, death is essential so that the entity, which is at the core of life, of every form of life, can regenerate sufficient energy and power to take on another physical form. So this is the warp, or is it the weft, of this cloth of life. And the weft, the other way, running through this constant cycle of life and death, the weft going this way is the law of cause and effect. At every minute and every second of our lives, we are making causes which produce effects which must appear at some time in our lives. The effect is immediate the moment you make the cause, but when it actually manifests itself, we're none of us sure of. It can manifest itself immediately almost, or it can manifest itself in 10, 15 or 20 years' time. So this is the warp and the weft of the cloth of life. And keeping all this together in one incredible harmony is what we call the principle of Esho Funi, the inseparability of man and his environment, or the inseparability of an entity and its environment. So every one of us has an environment. At the moment, the environment is this hall with everybody in it. I also have an environment, which is all of you and this hall. Each of us is an entity, and our environments totally overlap each other. What I say to you now affects everybody in one way or another. Either you understand what I'm saying or you don't. It's an effect, isn't it? And the way you accept what I'm saying affects everyone else in your environment. All the environments of every entity here is overlapping. If one of you stood up and shouted, "You're talking a load of nonsense," everybody would sit up and be startled and it'd throw everything out of gear for a bit, wouldn't it? This is an obvious example. In much more subtle ways, everything that is happening in the environment of every entity is affecting every other entity through its environment because the environments overlap. So looked at from that point of view, one action, in fact, affects the entire universe. This is the startling point which Buddhism makes clear. Because your environment as the entity which makes an action or cause is overlapped by another environment, another, out far into space. So this is the background which holds this pattern of life into something constant, continuous, and harmonious. The movement of life and death, the interlacing of cause and effect, and eshofuni, the inseparability of all these environments, one affecting each other all the time. So this was the first thing that Nichiren Daishonin explains in this Gosho. This is, put in very simple terms, is the law of life. But of course, the workings of that law are very deep. And we go on discovering more and more about it the more we practice Buddhism. And then the second point, which he emphasized strongly, was that the only difference between what he calls a common mortal and a Buddha is that the Buddha is enlightened. In other words, a Buddha is a human being, and all human beings can become Buddha. This, of course, although we as members of Nichiren Shoshu accept now, quite almost without batting an eyelid, in those days was a most incredible pronouncement. Shakyamuni had said this, but his teaching was extremely difficult to follow. Not everyone understood it. Therefore, in the 2,000 years after Shakyamuni died, people still looked at Shakyamuni as if he was a sort of god, something sort of superhuman, something that anyway the average human being felt he couldn't be himself. But in fact, Shakyamuni had also said that every human being can be a Buddha. And Nichiren Daishonin strongly reaffirms this point in this Gosho. So the purpose of our practice is nothing else but to become a Buddha. That is to say, to make the Buddha nature or the Buddha state in our lives the basic tendency lying behind everything that we do every minute of the day. In the earlier part of the Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin said to chant Myoho Renge Kyo with the realization that Shakyamuni, who attained enlightenment countless eons ago, the Lotus Sutra, which leads all people to Buddhahood, and we ordinary human beings are in no way different or separate from each other, is to inherit the ultimate law of life. So this is the incredible inheritance that we are all in the process of receiving, and which we will all I hope, transmit before we die to countless hundreds of people. Then Nichiren Daishonin went on to talk about the purpose of death, which I explained a little earlier, and the eternity of life, and the need to live a full life. You remember, he said to practice and live our lives as if every moment was the last moment. To live really full lives, developing ourselves and our potentiality absolutely to maximum. So in this way, we should die chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And through that, we would die in the state of Buddha and project ourselves forward rapidly through the state of death into a new life where we would also meet the Gohonzon and continue making value in life. This is an interesting point, isn't it? At another part of the Gosho, you remember, Nichiren Daishonin went into the horrors of hell, all the 10 different kinds of miserable hells that exist. Slimy hells and smelly hells and so on, hot hells and cold hells. If you die in hell, your life force is very limited. If you think of the times when you've been in hell in this life, your life force has been negligible, hasn't it? Your head goes down and you feel trapped and completely bowed down by the problems and difficulties that surround you. If you die in that state with so little life force, the period that you take in the state of death in order to regenerate enough life force to take on a new physical form is going to be very long indeed. Therefore, the important thing is to die in the state of Buddha, where your life force is surging and strong, and as Sensei once described it, you'll project yourself through the state of death, or the latent state, rapidly into a great new life. Then, finally, Nichiren Daishonin began, as we ended the last lecture, to warn us about not cutting ourselves off from this continuing heritage that has been transmitted to us in life after life. That is to say, we are chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo now because we made the causes in a previous existence to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo now. This is why we found the Gohonzon. Once we understand that everything in life is cause and effect, this is irrefutable. We made the cause to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo now. If we fail not only to inherit that law again, but also transmit it, and encouraging its transmission, we cut this heritage from out of our lives, and who knows how long it may take for us to be able to find it again. So now we'll just ask Ricky to read through the Gosho as far as we want to go tonight. Okay, Ricky?
I have just carefully read through your letter. To reply, the ultimate law of life and death, as transmitted from the Buddha to the people, is Myoho Renge Kyo. The 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo were transferred from the 2 Buddhas inside the treasure tower, Shakyamuni and Tahoe, to Bodhisattva Jogyo, carrying on a heritage unbroken since the infinite past. Myo represents death and Ho life. Life and death are the 2 phases passed through by the entities of the 10 worlds, the entities of all sentient beings which embody the law of cause and effect, Renge. Tiantai the Great said, "You must realize that the interrelated actions and reactions of the sentient beings and their environments all manifest the law of the simultaneity of cause and effect. Sentient beings and their environments here means the reality of life and death. The law of simultaneity of cause and effect is clearly at work in everything that lives and dies. Dengyo the Great said, "Birth and death are the mysterious workings of essential life. The ultimate reality of life lies in existence and non-existence. No phenomena, heaven or earth, yin or yang, the sun or the moon, the 5 planets, or any life condition from hell to Buddhahood are free from birth and death. Thus, the life and death of all phenomena are simply the 2 phases of Myoho Renge-kyo." In his Makashikan, Tiantai says, "The emergence of all things is a manifestation of their intrinsic nature, and their extinction, the withdrawal of that nature into the state of latency. Shakyamuni and Tahoe Buddhas too are the 2 phases of life and death. Therefore, to chant Myoho Renge-kyo with the realization that Shakyamuni, who attained enlightenment countless eons ago, the Lotus Sutra, which leads all people to Buddhahood, and we ordinary human beings are in no way different or separate from each other, is to inherit the ultimate law of life and death. To carry on this heritage is the most important task for Nichiren's disciples, and that is precisely what it means to embrace the Lotus Sutra. For one who powerfully brings forth his faith and chants Nam-myoho Renge-kyo with the profound insight that this is the last moment of his life, the Sutra proclaims, "After his death, 1,000 Buddhas will extend their hands to free him from all fear and keep him from falling into the evil paths. How can we possibly hold back our tears at the inexpressible joy of knowing that not just 1 or 2, nor only 1 or 200, but as many as 1,000 Buddhas will come to greet us with their open arms? One who does not have faith in the Lotus Sutra will instead find his hands firmly gripped by hellhounds, just as the Sutra warns, after he dies, he will fall into the hell of incessant suffering. How pitiful! The 10 kings of hell will then pass judgment on him, and the heavenly messengers who have been with him since his birth will censure him for his evil acts." Just imagine that those 1,000 Buddhas extending their hands to all of Nichiren's disciples who chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo are like sweet melons or fragrant moonflowers extending their slender vines. My disciples have been able to receive and embrace the Lotus Sutra by virtue of the strong ties they had formed with this teaching in their past existences. They are certain to attain Buddhahood in the future. The heritage of the Lotus Sutra flows within the lives of those who never forsake it in any lifetime whatsoever, whether in the past, the present, or the future. Those who disbelieve and slander the Lotus Sutra will destroy the seeds for becoming a Buddha in this world. Because they cut themselves off from the potential to attain enlightenment, they do not share the ultimate heritage of faith. All in all, the disciples and believers of Nichiren should chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in perfect unity, Itai-doshin, transcending all differences among themselves to become as indivisible as fish and the water in which they swim. This spiritual bond is the basis for the universal transmission of the ultimate law of life and death. Herein lies the true goal of Nichiren's propagation. When you are so united, even the great hope for Causton Rufu can be fulfilled without fail. If any of Nichiren's disciples disrupts the unity of Itai-doshin, he will destroy his own castle from within.
Thank you very much. So actually tonight we're just going to do that last paragraph that was read, and I'll ask Ricky to read it once more.
All in all, the disciples and believers of Nichiren should chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo in perfect unity, Itai-doshin, transcending all differences among themselves to become as indivisible as fish and the water in which they swim. This spiritual bond is the basis for the universal transmission of the ultimate law of life and death. Herein lies the true goal of Nichiren's propagation. When you are so united, even the great hope for Causton Rufu can be fulfilled without fail. If any of Nichiren's disciples disrupts the unity of Itai-doshin, he will destroy his own castle from within.
Thank you. So this is such a famous paragraph, and in his lecture on this Gosho, Sensei went more deeply into this whole question of unity, or Itai-doshin, than has ever been done before. So the first thing that comes very clear from that paragraph is that we absolutely cannot inherit the law or transmit it ourselves to others unless there is Itai Doshin or unity. Without unity or Itai Doshin, the flow of Buddhism will come to a grinding halt. So, because of this, unity or Itai Doshin is often referred to and constantly stressed in study and in our practice. And the purpose of this talk this evening is to delve more deeply into it than ever before, to discover just why that is. So I think the first thing that we need to be clear on is how incredibly rare true unity is. Itai Doshin, as you know, means many bodies or many characters or natures with one spirit or mind. So there are many, many fields of society where you can see unity or Itai Doshin on a very short-term basis. But because the six worlds, the six lower worlds, are working in everybody's lives, the three poisons of anger, greed, and ignorance are actively at work everywhere. Unity, or true unity, is usually very short-lived. In a great football team, of course, when it wins the cup final, there must be great unity. But the moment those footballers pack up their bags and have a shower and go home, that unity is probably totally disappeared. They each go their own way, and they live their lives independently and probably, in some cases, quite selfishly. Or you could say there is tremendous unity in a great orchestra when it plays a symphony or any other great piece of music. For the period of that piece of music, their unity is magnificent. They couldn't achieve the wonderful sounds which they do without it. But again, once the symphony is over and the audience leaves, that unity disappears. Even if you look at greater masses of people, at greater movements, unity has always been found an extremely difficult thing to make enduring or lasting. You could say that there was great unity, perhaps, at the beginning of the revolution in Russia. But that unity has sadly disintegrated since those times. A great leader like Mao Zedong, great as he was, found it extremely difficult to maintain unity throughout the land of China. And there are 1,000 or 10,000 similar examples in the whole of history. People have set out with great ideals, and in the excitement of the moment, they may be in one spirit or mind, determined to achieve that goal. But as time passes and they face hardships and difficulties, the ego and selfishness has gradually taken control. Greed, anger, and ignorance, the three poisons, have started their work. And in no time at all, what was once a great movement full of ideals and fanfares of trumpets becomes a miserable wreck. So Itai Doshin is something incredibly difficult to achieve in a constant form. So of course, in Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai, the prime point of our unity is the Gohonzon. You could say in a football team, the prime point is to win the cup. Once the cup is won, that's it. But with the Soka Gakkai, the point of unity is the Gohonzon, that absolutely constant, unchanging factor which exists in each person's home and which exists, most important of all, in the Daigohonzon at the head temple at Taiseki. If once we forgot the Gohonzon, once we begin to fail to put the Gohonzon first in everything we do, then of course our unity too would gradually disappear. And the six worlds would gradually take over control of Nichiren Shoshu Soka Gakkai. And before you knew where we were, we would become a bickering, gossiping, social club. So truly it's the power of the Gohonzon which maintains this incredible unity that enables us to meet frequently, then to go out into the world on our own business, and to come back and meet again, always in a spirit of joy. It's the same spirit of unity which enables us to help each other, which fills us with concern for those who may be suffering, and which drives us on to go out and shakabuku other people to understand this incredibly great and wonderful law. So the Gohonzon first, which is the first principle of the Soka Gakkai, is vitally important. At the beginning of this Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin said, the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo, that's to say the Gohonzon, were transferred by the 2 Buddhas inside the treasure tower, Shakyamuni and Taho, to Bodhisattva Jogyo, carrying on a heritage unbroken since the infinite past. So Bodhisattva Jogyo, as you know, is the leader of the bodhisattvas of the earth. In this vision or story of Shakyamuni's, he represented Nichiren Daishonin, the Buddha of Mappo, the Buddha of this age in which we live now. So Shakyamuni, who preceded Nichiren Daishonin, and Taho, who was the legendary Buddha representing all the other Buddhas of the universe, were in Itai Doshi, in that ceremony of the treasure tower in the Lotus Sutra, was a ceremony of Itai Doshi, of their determination to transmit the law from those times 3,000 years ago to us today, and on from us into eternity. So that middle sentence in this paragraph, this spiritual bond is the basis for the universal transmission of the ultimate law of life and death. The spiritual bond is the Gohonzon. So this is most important for all of us. It's very easy to forget to put the Gohonzon first. It's very easy in our own lives to forget to do it. Indeed, the negative force in our life is working at us all the time to try to make us forget to put the Gohonzon first. But also, we can forget to put the Gohonzon first in our society or organization. It's very easy to think that the words we speak at a meeting are the most important thing. The words are important because that is the way we keep Itai Doshin from the surface point of view. But what maintains it is in fact the Gohonzon. So the most important thing before a meeting is the Gongyo and the Daimoku you chant, not the meeting itself. Through the Gongyo and Daimoku, your wisdom flows. And you can then achieve results from the talk in the shortest possible time and with the maximum results. So truly the Gohonzon is the prime point of Itai Doshin, and we must always try to remember this. Every so often you'll find in your district or your group or in your own life that you're forgetting it. And in some way you will be reminded through cause and effect working in your life, and you'll realize what's happened and you'll come back to it. Maybe another member will tell you. Something will happen in your life. Something will remind you that the Gohonzon is no longer the center point. Without the Gohonzon as the center point, the heritage cannot flow through us or onto anybody else. So Nichiren Daishonin then says, herein lies the true goal of Nichiren's propagation. Herein lies the true goal of Nichiren's propagation. And previously it said universal transmission. This spiritual bond is the basis for the universal transmission. In other words, there is no limit to the propagation or transmission of this law. There is no exclusivity. There is no book of rules that says this person is okay for the society and that person is not. The law should be transmitted to everybody. Whether they will accept the law or not, whether they will understand it, is of course up to them and their karma. But our purpose should be to sow seeds wherever we go, without discrimination whatsoever. So Nichiren Daishonin truly in those words means the universal transmission, that the law of life should be transmitted to everybody, so that everybody has a chance to continue that heritage from lifetime to lifetime. So the great danger here, of course, is exclusivity. This is a trap we can all too easily fall into. It's a human failing that we tend to judge people on their looks, or their voice, or their appearance, or even sometimes what they're wearing, or the look in their eyes, or whatever. But this should never be so in the case of sowing the seeds of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. No matter who, no matter how shabbily they may be dressed, no matter what their eyes look like, no matter whether they're tall or short, fat or thin, if we have the opportunity to sow the seeds of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, we should do so. So Shakabuku is an act of absolutely pure compassion. We have to summon up that compassion through our daimoku in order to be able to overcome that human tendency to create exclusive groups. And Shakabuku, wherever we go. Of course, this is the most famous story about this, is the story of Sesendoji, which you know, all of you know, I love it. And I've mentioned it before to you. But just the beginning of that story, you remember, is how Sesendoji, who was actually Shakyamuni Buddha in one of his many lives, and he was wandering through this forest, and he suddenly heard a voice reciting a verse of Buddhist teachings. And he couldn't think where it came from. And he looked everywhere, and he searched through the forest and the jungle, and the only person he could find was this appalling-looking demon with teeth like knives and pointed ears and red, starry hair. A dreadful-looking creature. And he couldn't believe it could be this person who was reciting a verse of Buddhism. But in fact it was. And he overcame all his dislike and horror of this creature, so much so that he even agreed to give his life to this demon if the demon would recite the words to him again and he could hear it. This is the true spirit of Buddhism. The true spirit of compassion arises from this non-exclusivity. Like Sesendoji, we have to fight ourselves sometimes to overcome our surface feelings for somebody. And if we take the trouble to do that, through our daimoku, compassion will come welling through, and we'll find ourselves able to shakabuku. I needn't remind you of the incredible transformation that occurs in people once they start to chant. Something which is so beautiful, isn't it, that it's beyond words. Something that gives you so much joy and happiness that you've never experienced any such joy or happiness before. Even the demon that Sesendoji met turned in the end into a handsome god in the story. And for sure, even the person who in normal times before you chanted you would have most disliked will turn into the most wonderful person once you teach them to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. So this is an important lesson about this, and extremely important regarding transmitting the heritage of the law of life on to others. I was thinking when I was preparing this lecture about our many, I'm glad to say now, good fortune babies. You know, a good fortune baby, for those who don't know, is a baby born to a house and home with the Causton. And of course, they have made the cause, those babies, for their good fortune in their previous life. This is why it is they're born into a home with the Causton. And I believe every one of you would agree with me that when you look at those babies, there is something very different about them. There's something very firm and almost wise and incredibly stable about them for babies. This is the good fortune of receiving the heritage of the law from lifetime to lifetime, before our very eyes. Of course, we're not all of us so fortunate as to find the Causton when we're first born. But we can make the great causes in this life, so that if we wish, in the next life, we can be born with the Causton at the moment of birth. So, when you see these good fortune babies, it really makes one understand this incredible heritage that exists even more deeply than before. So it's faith in the Causton, based on a determination to uphold unity, Itai-doshin, which transmits the law into the future, and indeed which enables us to inherit it. Now this applies directly to all of our actions, of course, in NSUK. If there is no Itai-doshin in NSUK, we cannot transmit the law or receive it properly ourselves. So Itai-doshin should be manifest in every district, for example, or group. Itai-doshin means that that group of people who, but for the Causton, would never have met each other, and who come from an incredibly wide variety of fields of society, can actually get together and work spontaneously, without orders or instructions or rules, in absolute unity. So, for instance, at a discussion meeting, there is something which everybody can do, because every single person has their own particular abilities. Itai-doshin doesn't mean that it's trying to make each person the same. Itai-doshin means many different bodies or characters, but one spirit or mind, one ideal, one determination or purpose. In the discussion meeting, this should be the very living example of Itaidoshi. So there are some people who are great at bringing people to the meeting, and other people find themselves hopeless at doing that. There are other people who can talk very clearly about some Buddhist principle and explain it. There are other people who can give great experiences. There are other people who can open the door with a wonderful smile. There are other people who can make beautiful decorations in the room. There are other people who make delicious cakes and great cups of tea. So the district or discussion meeting should be the very expression and epitome of Itaidoshi. There isn't one person, whether Gohonzon member of 20 years practice, or Gohonzon member of 1 year's practice, or Naitoku of 3 weeks practice or 1 day's practice, who cannot contribute something great from their lives towards that discussion. If only half the members of a discussion meeting are taking part in that meeting in any way, in other words, there is half of the people sitting there looking at their toes and not really entering into the spirit of it at all. It's like a half-paralyzed body, and will achieve, as Nichiren Daishonin says, nothing remarkable. So really, the discussion meeting should make Itaidoshin, or unity, live for us. And those of us especially who are group leaders or district leaders, it's our task to discover the great points in everybody and encourage everybody to use those great points for the benefit of the whole. So, of course, this is where the organization comes into play for our own point of view as well. The Soka Gakkai isn't only to spread Buddhism and propagate it for Causton Rufu. The Soka Gakkai is also to help us and encourage us to achieve our own human revolution. It's this effort we have to make to exist in harmony with other members with whom we might not otherwise have had anything in common, which makes us face our own human revolution. If we evade that and we sit in the shadows or in the corner and don't participate or don't come to meetings, we cannot do our human revolution. It's only by coming to meetings that we can begin to achieve it, of course combined with our practice to the Gohonzon. When we go on small courses to treks, like for instance next weekend, spring course goes off, about 35 people, they've never come together, many of them, before. Even then, for people who've been practicing for 2 or 3 years, it's sometimes difficult to live even for 6 or 7 days, cheek by jowl, in harmony. Some sort of irritation creeps in about the person snoring next door to you, or the noise Mr. Causton makes when he's washing his teeth in the morning, and so on. It's amazing. Such little trivial things, you know, but these are the things which are the beginnings of greater things, worse things. This intolerance of other people's sufferings, other people's difficulties, other people's differences. So, Causton Rufu of the world, peace and harmony amongst people, in other words, begins in the discussion meeting, and